as such, I think piracy has a significant benefit. I get to take your stuff. The aim is to take, attain, and use and benefit from the fruits of others, period. That's piracy. I think that in itself deserves a title. I like to think of that title as winning.
Welcome to the Mongrel Court Star Citizen Piracy Talk Show. I'm your host, Agent Letty. This month's topic of discussion is Piracy and PvP. After some controversy at the start of April in regards to the actions of those whose focus is PvP receiving warnings and some community members receiving bans, it seemed appropriate that we approach the subject from the perspective of how piracy and PvP currently work, as well as explore the mindset of those who engage in piracy gameplay within Star Citizen. Once again, this particular topic went longer than expected with some very interesting perspectives and discussion that happened on the topic. The separate points that we have discussed have been timestamped to keep within the theme of easy to digest content for you all to browse at your convenience. That's enough of me talking. Let's get on with the show.
So this is a part where you guys are looking at the talking heads, and we're actually going to move on to discussing the topic of piracy and PvP. But before we get started, I'm going to get my guests to introduce themselves. So starting on my far right, your left, we've got a DT. DT, take it away.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You have an avatar there. That's a Assault Space Marine. Just another bit of science fiction fanfare that I enjoy. A little bit about me for the audience. You don't know me. I am known as DT. I'm a digital targeteer. My goal is to enter the game to have fun. I am polite with people that I play. I'm absolutely innocuous to those that like to pursue the PvE. I'm very friendly, and I choose with whom I associate with very carefully. My gameplay loop is, and always has been, almost a direct correlation to the quote from Firefly, that I aim to misbehave. I'm just as content to play along with a mining org and set them up for failure as I am to go along with an RP org and do the same. I will always be there just to have fun for the people that I fly with and set you up in a perfect situation for our desire. Thank you.
Well, that's a better intro than I could have come up with. Bitters.
Hey, I'm Bitters, also known as the Sweat from Canada. Relatively new compared to a lot of people to Star Citizen. I picked up the game kind of in early November, late October of last year. And since my take on most games I play is a PvP-orientated one, I soon found myself involved with the Mongrel Squad and engaged typically in piracy and the odd dogfight now and then.
Nice. The Sweat from Canada. I didn't know about that until earlier yesterday when I watched that fight. It was quite good. Coconut Jones, welcome back. You might as well reintroduce yourself because somebody may not know who you are.
All right. I am a fellow pirate. I run a group called the Black Coral Syndicate. We are a close group of friends that came over from EVE Online. Most of us I've backed since 2013. I also run a YouTube channel showing off our fun little piracy things under the same name as TheycallmeCoconutJones. And we run around the universe causing trouble and picking fights and having a good time.
And you guys should already know who I am, because I've already done my intro. And on that note, we're actually going to get cracking into this discussion. Before we get there, though, I promise this is not going to go for 3 hours. Hopefully. So, the discussion is piracy and PvP, and the first topic of the discussion is how much PvP is involved in doing piracy now. Floor is open for anybody to answer. You don't need to put your hand up or anything like that. I may target questions at you guys at different points, but pretty much the floor is yours.
Well, I can go first then, maybe to set a base. So when considering PvP and piracy, to me, piracy is entirely a PvP construct. I mean, I guess that will depend a bit on our definition of PvP, but piracy is pitting two or more players who desire mutually exclusive outcomes against one another. That's in the nature of PvP to me, whether there's violence or not. I have other hobbies. I do play other games. In the same way, racing, like cars or something of that nature, is a player versus player endeavor in my books. It's competition. So, in my opinion, I view the entirety of what we do as pirates as PvP, whether or not we're sneaking on ship and just yanking out a box, or if we're doing a full-on curb stomp.
Yeah, for me, it's similar. I personally want to exclusively focus on PvP and piracy. To me, they're very intermixed. Even like this kind of came from a philosophy that I kind of picked up from EVE Online. There was a group known as Honorable Third Party, and I kept on finding myself in this loop of doing like NPC missions to get the money that I needed to buy the ships that I wanted to go PvP in. And it would grind me out. Like I just would get sick of running these NPC missions to the point where I just didn't want to play the game anymore. And that changed big time when I actually started basically pirating in EVE. And I've kind of just kept the philosophy because say from the perspective, not even from the perspective of a pirate, right? Say you want to be a dog fighter. If you can make money PvPing, right, it's going to improve the skill set that you use during PvP. It's going to make you a better player at that topic or at that subject, right? And it's going to make you more interested in continuing to do that like play style. So like that's kind of my take on it.
Gentlemen, so I like things that you mentioned. There's it's two or more people, and then I really like what Coconut Jones mentioned about how playing in EVE Online, you got sick of the grind to get what you want, and so eventually you decide there's a better way. With Star Citizen, I think that the PvP involved with piracy is as much with any other form of PvP, but you must also incorporate all the other play styles to make it effective. To effectively pirate, you have to have a baseline of organizational training to be able to fill a number of roles depending on the target. This translates into a robust logistic requirement to train, man, and equip an organization, just like any other org, except you also have to have detailed understanding of how you're going to keep the target and get the prize. I've run a Goody Two Shoes org, I've run outlaw orgs, I've run pirate orgs, not necessarily just in Star Citizen, but what I can tell you is that all of them pale in comparison with the level of difficulty, intricacy, and system understanding that's required to execute piracy effectively in Star Citizen.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was something that we kind of touched on with the last Mongrel Court, is you have to have a pretty good understanding of of like the whole game to kind of actually wrap your head around what you need to do to function in that kind of situation.
Absolutely. One of the things I don't know if it was the last one, or maybe it was the one before last. I think Nolat had my favorite quote ever, is that pirates are, what was it? It was pirates
Criminals.
and PvPers, they're just better. Criminals, that's what it is. Criminals are just better than everybody else at all the game loops because they have to be.
That's the first thing that came to mind as well.
So some really good points there. A lot of stuff that I agree with, but I guess there's a point, and this is something that a lot of PvE players bring up, but this comes into this question: does piracy require PvP in order for it to exist?
It's definitely an interesting one. Because right at some point, because right now we're exclusively limited to players to hit, which, right, from my perspective, isn't too big of a deal because I want to focus on PvP. But right, at some point in the future, we might have more AI haulers and miners running around the verse that will probably end up targeting. So probably not required at some point, but I definitely think it put. I think it even from the perspective of a non PvPer, I think it is important because if it puts them through a scenario that they're uncomfortable with, and it makes them think about it. Well, it can make them think about potential ways to get better and not have that happen again. So I think it's an important element for sure.
I agree with Jones there in terms of, it's probably not a pure necessity, but in terms of a thriving aspect of the game, I think you have a requirement for PvP, because I think that's a requirement that exists in most games, especially when done at a high level or, in an end game type of environment. Pitting players and people against each other for more, spontaneous conflict with an unknown outcome is usually a more compelling outcome. This isn't necessarily like, farm truck simulator or like mining simulator. Eventually, we're living in a universe that's going to be, somewhat akin to, a conflict-based system, like we saw when people were trying to, settle America, when we had the Wild West, or really any sort of space environment that we've seen in science fiction where you see that conflict arise. Even if they code the AI as adept as they can to be, difficult to take down, it will always miss that, certain feel of engaging with another team or another player and not knowing what's going to happen.
Right, definitely.
I like the 2 points that you guys brought up. So like Coconut Jones, saying that it probably adds more content, if I understand your point correctly.
Right, and experience as well.
Absolutely. And then Bitters, I like the point you brought up. One of the things I think both of you kind of keyed in for me, I don't think that piracy or that PvP is necessary for piracy. I don't. But what I would tell you is that it depends on the player. For most people, this isn't the first game that we've all played. Anybody that's been playing video games for a while recognizes the patterns that you see in NPCs, and you can exploit those patterns. And after a while, fighting NPCs is boring. So if PvP doesn't exist for piracy, the piracy game loop would naturally become boring. So having PvP for piracy, it adds greater gains. The aim is to take, attain, use, and benefit from the fruits of others. And ultimately, you're going to get better, and they're going to get better, and there's going to be that evolution of gameplay. And that's what makes a game fun. That's what makes it endure. So if CIG is paying attention, if there is a function to develop piracy through PvP, it will naturally grow and retain people's interest.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
I feel like one thing as well. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jones.
No, go for it.
One thing I do in terms of, say, its place in the game is when I look at other games, maybe EVE Online, Elite Dangerous, both games I haven't played, but I definitely have heard about them, and I've definitely heard specific stories about them that kind of get, news coverage, I guess, or buzz larger than the game player base itself, and those largely are around incidents created by PvP, by player conflict. Like you hear about EVE Online and people losing a ton of ISK or whatever the credit system is there, and how that impacts real world dollars. Or you hear about the stories or the story in Elite Dangerous, where they had sort of a scripted event going on that was going to be player driven, and it had an outcome that people didn't really see coming because of a PvP based environment, and some essentially pirates or griefers to some degree decided to make their play and take their shot. I think it's a good way of generating buzz for the game, of making people excited about what could happen in Star Citizen versus more consistent scripted loops.
I really like that point, Bitters. The thing I always, whether it's real life or video gaming, there is no one person in a room that is smarter than everyone in the room. And the beautiful thing about Star Citizen is the content that is created here is created by the thousands or millions of players that are playing the game. And any game developer that thinks that they are going to create the greatest game by themselves with their small team of designers instead of creating an open-ended system will fall short. And that is where EVE and Elite Dangerous were able to capitalize.
Yeah, I think when it comes to any sort of like gameplay, like when it comes to, I guess, expanding on the content that you've actually got within the game environment, is that PvE will only get you so far, because as Bitters has pointed out, like NPCs are just, or the AI is driven by systems and routines that have been instructions essentially that it's been given, that if this thing happens, you do this, and you do the same thing over 100 times. We as humans, like, we naturally will identify patterns, and for some players, that's they're happy with that. They're happy to see the pattern and just do the same thing over and over again. And then there are those of us out there that can't stand doing that and recognize those patterns, and as soon as it starts becoming repetitive, they start getting bored. They start looking for that next that next thing. And when it comes down to PvP, I recall it was an interview with Chris Roberts. It was I can't even remember. It wasn't a Calling All Devs. I think it was an Ask the Chairman, where he talks about how Star Citizen is supposed to be a predominantly PvE game, and not everybody wants to be able to, or not everybody wants to get into that dogfight, and because they could potentially lose. They're not that good at fighting. He identified it as not an issue, but as a point. PvP, there is a winner, there is a player who wins, and then there's a player who loses. Whereas when it comes to PvE, there's a player that wins, and then if the AI loses, it doesn't care, because it's just doing what it's supposed to. If that player loses, then they don't feel as bad, because it's a weird thing. Like, there are players, people don't feel as bad losing to something that's not real. Whereas when it comes to PvP, if you lose to another player, it's one of those things where it's like your personal skill sets, your ego is bruised, your skill sets are challenged, and you're just sitting there going, well, you feel bad because somebody just kicked your ass. Nobody wants that. So when it comes down to does piracy require PvP in order to exist? No, it doesn't, but it makes it better. The challenge of taking down another player makes it a lot more interesting, because that person has their own goals, they're driven by their own goals, and they don't want to lose in that encounter either, and they're going to do things that you may have never encountered before. Some of them are quite predictable, some of them are very predictable in their actions, but there have been times where we've done piracy hits and I've been surprised. Like I've seen caterpillar pilots who were able to throw the thing around like it was a fighter and escape a QED ship, which I was amazed by. Which also then triggered us, though, and this is the thing, this is the other benefit, like, and something that I actually like about how piracy is mainly focused on PvP at the moment. How we have this play and counterplay. I don't feel that bad about losing to another player if, like, it's a good, experience. Like, if we did everything that we could and it just wasn't enough, then it's one of those situations where it's like, all right, well, self-reflect. What happened? How did we get beat? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? And in this scenario, observing how this caterpillar pilot was just flying in atmosphere and how they managed to just like maneuver the caterpillar so that the mantis that we're using just eventually was overheating too much and the caterpillar was able to burn away. And just those maneuvers, observing those, one of the other reasons why we record every hit that we do is not only to protect ourselves from accusations of griefing, but also so that we can rewatch those scenarios again without the stress of actually having to focus on doing everything else that we're supposed to do, and focus more on what the target was doing and like how they managed to outsmart us or outmaneuver us and beat us, so that we can then focus ourselves to improve. And I think like that in itself extends on the longevity of gameplay there, because what that actually does is it stops you from being like, well, it doesn't stop you from being your head buried in the game, but it kind of occupies your mind outside the game when you're actually when you're not playing Star Citizen. You got a bit of free time but you're not near your computer, and you start reflecting on piracy hits that you've done against other players, and you're sitting there going, you remember about that one particular thing, and then you start running through your head how you'd actually counter that against NPCs. Like, to start off with, you may end up doing that, but then once you've hit enough NPCs, it's just formulaic again. So then you stop doing that, and then it just becomes it turns into that sort of grind. Some players like to do that. They find it relaxing, they don't have to think about what they're doing. But you'll find that when it comes to PvP and players who are enjoying PvP, they're going to look for that next challenge, that next hit, that next difficult scenario to put themselves through, so that they can test their mettle, see if they come out on top, and if they don't, then that kind of drives them forward. It's a unique aspect of players who focus on PvP, is that failure actually drives you to success. You fail, you lose, it's like, all right, you pick yourself up, you work harder to get better, and then you go back out there and have another crack. Some people don't want to do that in a video game. That's understandable, and we all play the game how we want to. But does piracy require PvP in order for it to exist? No, but as I said before, it makes it better. And yeah, it is true. Like right now, piracy is exclusive to PvP because the NPC just isn't there yet. There are supposed to be cargo ships getting around with cargo in them that are NPC driven, but I believe it was 3.12, so last patch, about midway through it, they all stopped carrying cargo. Don't know why, don't really care, because finding them is bloody just as hard. So it will become a thing in the future when CIG decides to focus on piracy, but until then, I'm quite happy just hitting players all the time.
Yeah, there's a couple of it really is amazing what extra information you pick up from recording some stuff. Like I'll literally just find stuff that I didn't even see at all completely in the footage, and be like, wow, okay, so that's how this dude flanked around me and got to the back of the Sentinel as I was trying to get out, and stuff like that. So it can really, honestly, even from the perspective of like PvEers, even if they did recordings, just simple recordings of some of the stuff they did, they might pick up targets coming in on their pirates coming in on them, like on the radar, or weird stuff that they missed, stuff that they should focus on for future. Another thing that you mentioned, right, the thing about Chris Roberts, where there's like the PvE slider, or how some players don't want to get in the situation of being PvP'd. Both worlds can exist at the same time, and I really don't like the idea of a PvE slider, and here's why. Because right now we have a very basic understanding of the game, right? It feels very, very raw. Right, and as someone who's kind of migrated over from Eve, right, the nullsec blocks and power alliances and stuff that kind of make the meat of that game, right? They're kind of, there's two sides to that coin. There's the big war, the war engine that everybody hears about from the news blurbs, right? That I think I think maybe Bitters mentioned. There's the big wars, but in order for those wars to actually be fueled and funded, because you gotta, every ship you lose in Eve, you gotta rebuild and rebuy and put all the parts on, is that there are huge wings of industrialists in pockets of super secure space where there's like literally like roadblocks of gate camps and networks of information to funnel back to those people, so that if anybody even gets remotely close, they can pack up and get to a safer spot, or just stop until the bad guys go away and then get back to mining. That's usually how it runs. It changed a bit when wormholes got added to Eve, but I won't go into that that whole nonsense. So both worlds can actually exist at the same time, and it gives the PvPers and the PvEers what they want.
I like the point you're making, Jones. How, there's sort of two different realms of PvE and PvP can kind of be symbiotic in that way. And obviously we don't want to jump a lot into theory crafting with Star Citizen, but that's one of the things that jumps out to me. I don't understand the other side as much as I probably could or should, but I'm always open to learning more about it. But once you mine all the gems, once you run all the cargo, and you make all the credits, what is your end game? What's your end goal with that? Is it just the experience of making the run? Because using that to then influence, say, system politics or wars or things like that seem like a very compelling use of that fundage and use of time.
Right. For the guy who's just in the rock mining, it's one thing to be like, oh, I just want to PvE all day. But when there's 250 of you, and all, like, say you're sharing those resources, and those resources are going to somebody who wants to use them to, say, like you said, influence politics, start wars, fund espionage, your innocent little mining game is going to turn into a much more vicious cycle of destruction than anything us pirates could pull together.
It's interesting too, because I feel like there's a small element of that right now in Star Citizen. Even just this week, I kind of interacted with it a little bit, where there are industrialists or mining operations and teams now that are more focused on Hadanite mining to create merits through Klesher. And then they're taking those merits to the PvPers that often have crime stat and kind of closing that game loop, right? It's letting the PvPers get out of prison sooner and get back to doing, the battling or the warring or the piracy, whatever they're engaged in.
Yeah, actually,
I really like the points that you guys are bringing up here. One of the things I caught from Agents was that PvP just makes piracy better. I liked what CoconutJones brought up about recording to see what you missed for the PvEers, and that all PvP is built on an industrial architecture. And then Bitters, I like the point how you mentioned that you didn't necessarily have a PvE background, and that you don't necessarily know what the other side is looking at. One of the things I like to look at from my own experience with Star Citizen, I came in starting with PvE. I didn't even fly for the first 2 weeks because I was just blown away by the level of detail in the game. I was walking around and gawking like a little noob at all the beautiful video, just the the virtual, I like to refer to as like virtual porn, not in the concept of something that is dirty, but just you're just so blown away at the detail. And regardless of what our background is, I think I would submit that most of us could agree it's the level of visual detail in the game and that incredibleness that brought you back consistently. But over time, as that fades and it becomes normal, you start seeking more. So what's the more? What's the next step? Is it to make the number bigger if you're a space trucker? Is it to go and break up those minerals and throw them into a mole and build your empire? Is it to eventually get into a ship and try the flight model and see how you do at dogfighting and strategizing and maneuvering your assets? What I really like about it is, regardless of your first forays into PvP, the possibilities are literally limitless in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got the potential. There's no game like it. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm heavily focused on PvP myself, but my first intro to the game was, winding up in some cave on Hurston and just being blown away by the level of detail and immersion, the sense of scale of even just like grabbing my hand tool and going down into the cave and picking up whatever I can find there. That was definitely like the initial hook. But as DT said, it became like, well, what's next? How can I keep pushing the experience into something that's, more routinely engaging?
Kind of on those lines, I would argue that the PvP slider isn't something in your option settings. It's something in your character development in the game.
I love that.
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
See, there was a calling all devs recently, and Todd Pappy's the one who spoke about the PvP slider, and pretty much, when Chris Roberts first pitched it, was like, something that players could interact with. You could dial it down, dial it up, whatever you wanted. Over time, though, that changed, and word got around that it got just removed. And Todd Pappy clarified it, where he said the PvP slider hasn't disappeared. What's happened is that it's no longer player facing, and what's happening is that your experience is based on what your actions are. So if you're like performing actions that are more PvE orientated, so you're taking on more missions where it's like you're going to be engaging with NPCs all the time, then you'll probably like the slider starts going towards more PvE types of experiences. Whereas if you're like a bounty hunter and you're just taking on like player bounties only, then the slider starts shifting you towards PvP. But the thing is that, like, and this is something that they always this is something that he pointed out, is like, there's never going to be a system that's going to be 100% safe. There is always going to be a chance of PvP. Always. It's just where you decide to play really dictates on the percentage of that PvP engagement. So it's one of those things where it's like, players will naturally, and this is one of those points where, like, I talk about my own personal journey. Like, I really wasn't into PvP as much as what I am now. Like, I play games like Call of Duty and stuff like that, jump into multiplayer, shoot some people, have a bit of fun, but never really got into it that much. Started playing a game called Guild Wars 2, got into that, did all the PvE stuff, and then eventually I'm like, alright, I need to go into this place called World versus World. And the first time I went in there, I had no fucking idea what I was doing. I was bloody running around like some, noob. Bloody saw somebody with a blue bloody Dorito over their head, so I followed them for a bit. Had people telling me off in chat for, doing the wrong thing, and I'm like, whatever. Came back to it, a couple more times, and then it got to a point where it was like, I started playing it more and more, and I stopped doing the PvE stuff because this became my content. Like, fighting for your server, fighting for supremacy, going around stealing, towers and keeps, and, getting into huge battles and things like that. rallying your own group to go and fight, your opponents, and the player agency behind what you actually take or what you build up behind, those sorts of experiences. Like, you can't really get that out of a PvE experience. Like, grabbing your friends, going out there and getting into, like, scenarios and situations where you've made decisions based on, like, objectives that have cropped up purely because you guys have made your own decisions, like that player agency there. Whereas when it comes to PvE, sided missions and things like that, you kind of guided along the way. Your hands are held, like, there'll be markers there that you got to look for. They'll have objective markers that'll show you where you got to go to next, like, you got to do this specific thing. Whereas normally in PvP scenarios, you make the objectives yourself. You decide how it's going to get done, and you work out what you need to get it done. And that's probably one of the things that's kept me in Star Citizen for as long as it has, like, doing piracy, is that it's player driven. Like, piracy right now is a player driven game loop. It requires, like, we do need miners, and we do need cargo haulers in order to do it. Right now it's just players, because CIG just hasn't gotten to that point where they've got reliable cargo hauling AI and cargo mining AI out there for us to pirate. But we'd still want to go and find players to pirate, and that's where, like, the idea behind corporate privateering starts cropping up and getting into organization warfare and things like that. Because what that starts moving towards is, like, right now, if you guys are watching our YouTube channel, you'll see all the piracy hits that we're doing, and these are just against random people. It's very rare that we find organized groups. When we do, it's freaking awesome, because they're a bit more coordinated. Yes. So they fight a bit harder. Normally if it's a single person, it's like we just show up, we try to engage them in dialogue, they pull a gun and we just gun them down, take their stuff anyway. But the player agency behind, making those decisions and creating your own experiences, like, PvE can only get you that so far. Whereas PvP, it's one of those things where it's like, that's the primary thing. You're generating your own content. And I think that's something, like, Star Citizen, as we've all pointed out, like, the potential there for player generated content is phenomenal. We just need the tools to be able to do it. Alright, so our next topic is going to be, is PvP piracy griefing?
Someone's gonna say yeah. But in all honesty, it's really gonna be dependent on how you define griefing, right? I mean, you read the Spectrum posts, you read Reddit, and some people's opinions would indicate that, like, any undesirable interaction with another player is griefing. Which, if that's kind of how you feel, it's going to be tough, I think, to change those minds and have a valid discourse with it, right?
Yeah, it really is almost comical how often we get called griefers. It's a little ridiculous, honestly, because, like, obviously we're playing an aggressive play style, right? We're pirates. We're whether it doesn't really matter how gentle or rigid or rough you are on the spectrum of piracy, like, you're still robbing people, so it's gonna rub someone the wrong way. Even if you go with the gentle discourse of just saying, you need to pay me to leave, yeah, you'll pretty much always get told to fuck off, or be called a griefer or something along those lines.
I was thinking about this. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bitters.
Yeah, I've had my turn. Go ahead. Yeah,
so I like the points that you gentlemen brought up. I would submit, though, that PvP is absolutely not griefing, is with the caveat of what is griefing. And I see griefing a specific way. So to share my perspective would illuminate that's in the YouTube video about that DT guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But either way, I'll share it so there's some kind of baseline. I think that griefing implies the aggressor is aggressing only to be aggressive, with nothing to gain but a player's death and the feeling that they beat them. But then technically, you could come back and say that's PvP. So, whatever. But that's my thought. As such, I think piracy has a significant benefit. I get to take your stuff. The aim is to take, attain, and use and benefit from the fruits of others, period. That's piracy. I think that in itself deserves a title. I like to think of that title as winning. But if it will soothe the target's ego to call me a griefer, I will happily emblazon it across the hull of my ship and sail it through the verse and continue to take all of your stuffs.
I think I just found the intro for this video.
See, yeah, that's a win right there.
I gotta hard disagree on calling griefing just killing another player in that simplified form. Even if it's a lonely person out in the middle of a moon, they get killed, they get respawned, they go about their business. I can't really see on a personal level how that's a grief. It's a quick occurrence. You got to do something else after. To me, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna think. I think aggressor might have been the wrong word. There might have been a more descriptive word, just with malice. Not even aggressive behavior. Just malice towards wanting to mess with somebody. But continue. I didn't want to interrupt you for too long there.
No,
I agree with that. We could change it to malice.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think of something that I was comfortable defining for griefing, and while having room in the definition for PvP, for random incidents and things like that, as well as kind of keeping in mind some of the discussions that came out of those griefing letters that CIG had sent. And where I was starting to kind of land in my head was that, for you to grief somebody, to me, you start to create a situation where the player cannot react and that you have no material objective to keep that player in that situation other than the pleasure of preventing them from playing. So whether that's pad ramming and not letting them leave a station, spawn killing over and over in other ways with no reason to do so. Because in theory, if you kill somebody, say at Bezdek, and they spawn at Everest, they can go somewhere else. They can go to Aberdeen or Ida, go about their business. But if they
can
can't,
go fly over to Microtech.
And even at the end of the day, you could force them to leave the server. And depending on the situation, that might be fair play, it might not be. There were some reported incidents of people that would leave servers only to be followed by players to continue the activity. That seemed, in a level of griefing. There was not a whole lot of objective I can see to do that. But that's where I started to sit, because if you're trying to prevent somebody from playing the game for a indefinite period of time with no real game-based reason to do so, I feel like that sort of starts to cross the line into griefing versus just PvP content.
See,
yeah, there's definitely a.
No, you go.
Go ahead.
Jones.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
I was just gonna.
I'll leave my point to last.
I was gonna just reaffirm the point that griefing, actual griefing, is definitely if you're spawn camping the pad, spawn camping the stations and then killing the ships on the pads and then actually just being a complete asshat to people. And then following them around and then actually bullying them or trying to do whatever. That's definitely griefing. You know what I mean? There's no gameplay content loop there. That's just you being a dickhead because you can be. Right? That's completely different than even just wanting to PvP. I don't know. I don't get why people would go with that kind of play. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? That's why I kind of was like, we gotta change the words, like malice. There's just something cruel about the way that they want to play the game, and that's completely different than legitimate PvP or piracy.
Yeah, this was actually before a lot of the current mongrels that we have are in the org, but when I first started streaming, I've actually been the subject of stream sniping. I've been the subject of technically what you'd call griefing, based on the conversation that we just had, where a security organization was essentially following me around with the intent of disrupting my ability to do piracy. Now, it was okay at different points, yeah, because it was PvP content. These guys weren't that great at it, so they'd show up and then we'd kick the shit out of them, and then they'd leave. But it started getting to a point where it was like they would start employing other tactics to be able to prevent us from doing piracy, or make it, more difficult for us, where they would just like show up on the server and make an announcement that we're there, and then we'd jump to another server and then they would do it again. If this normally only happened while I was streaming, so they're able to watch where I was at, it's actually one of the reasons why Mongrel Squad's MO is not to run red when we're doing piracy ops. This actually was born out of this necessity to try and keep ourselves hidden before we're about to hit a target, so that these guys didn't know where we were and didn't disrupt the hit before we could even do it. To a certain degree, it was an interesting challenge for us because we were being hunted, but it was a shit way of being hunted because they were just able to show up whenever they wanted. Normally in a very public manner, normally with the intent of like disrupting piracy ops, but only in a way that, made them look good. So in that sort of scenario, it was frustrating, and my solution to that situation got to the point where it was like, if we saw them in the server list, we'd server hop. Because what these guys really wanted, I worked out what they wanted early on, was like they just wanted that PvP encounter. They wanted that fight. They had done all the PvE content. They wanted fights. But they didn't want just getting into, a dogfighting battle the whole time, just sit at PO and just, duke it out there. What they wanted was like more scenario-based fights. And because they knew of the way that we did piracy, where we'd show up, we'd be attempting to pirate someone. So sometimes we'd be boarding ships, other times we'd be like, extorting them. These guys wanted to be able to show up and prevent that from happening, engage us, and, pretty much prevent us from doing piracy, which is a perfectly fine thing for, a security organization to do. Except these guys' method of actually tracking me down was by watching my stream and looking at where I was. One of my sayings when it came to streaming was, streaming piracy is the stupidest thing that you can ever do, because people don't like you doing piracy, and fucking if they are able to find where you're at, they're going to go, look. Those who want to stop you from doing piracy will use that as a resource to find you and stop you. And those who want to avoid you will use that as a resource to see where you're at. And if they notice you on the server, they'll just bounce. So, when it comes to like that sort of like mindset of like, is PvP piracy griefing? I would say no. Griefing comes in many forms. Like, as I've mentioned, I have been subject to stream sniping and what you would consider griefing. It got to a point though where it, stopped, which was good. But it's one of those scenarios where it was like, it was a bit of a preview to what server meshing was actually going to bring. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people fully understand when it comes to, piracy in general, is that we're not expected to be nice about what we're doing. Like, that's a choice on our part if we want to be nice about it. Our objective is to take your stuff. That's it.
Right.
If
I mean,
if you want to be an obstacle to that, that's on you. In which case, it's
I
like
just want to add. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just want to add that I make it a point to be as nice and polite as possible when I pirate. I like to think of it as service with a smile.
See,
It's a good
I
point.
I think when it comes to like doing any sort of piracy, like I'm always of the mindset like it should be the person on the ground making that call, because I know that there are lots of orgs out there who are going to be engaging in piracy once it's more fleshed out, and like their philosophy is just going to be shoot and loot. But you show up, kill everything
really
that
good point.
moves, grab everything, and go, and that's how they want to do it. There are others who want to, do the whole talking first, showing up in, essentially extortion or ransom-based piracy. And, that's how they want to do it. And the thing about it is like, we're only half the equation when it comes to any of these encounters. The other half is the person that we're pirating, and it really comes down to how they want to play it out. So, like on Mongrel Squad's YouTube channel, we actually have a wide variety of different types of piracy that we engage in. And part of the reason behind that is like it's an exploration into the piracy, gameplay and what we can actually do with it with the limited mechanics that we have. And, like it's quite clear that over all the different times that we've done piracy, we end up having to resort to just killing the target because they don't understand what's going on. They see people with guns and they start pulling their own. Or they do recognize what's going on and they think that they can take us, and then attempt to pull out a gun or attempt to shoot back, and then they just get smashed because we showed up prepared to do piracy, whereas they showed up prepared to do mining, or they showed up prepared to do cargo hauling. And that's a bit of a mindset there.
I just want to interject real quick. We heisted somebody once, and the guy had the nerve to pull a toy pistol and actually start shooting it at the guy with the real gun. So it didn't. I had to recheck. I literally had to recheck the footage, and I looked at the dude's pistol in the little video feed that pops up when you call the guy. And I looked at the gun, and I was like, I had to triple check it. I was like, are you serious? Is this fucking real? He pulled a toy pistol.
That's actually the objective of Mongrel Squad at the moment, is to pirate somebody just using the toy pistols to see if they notice.
That's going to work. So I want to address that Agents brought up about halting gameplay can be griefing. I just wanted to make a shout out to the most inconsequential player in the game. They're so inconsequential, I really can't remember their name. And if anybody here remembers it, just don't bring it up because of how inconsequential it is. But there's somebody that every single time anybody gets into the server, that person will sit there and they'll post a news update every freaking 3 or 4 minutes. But what they don't realize is we actually look at it as like a badge of honor when he starts listing off the names, and people are sitting there in the channel going, oh, I didn't make the list yet. Oh, I made the list. I'm somebody. So that person is providing content. I don't know if that person realizes the content they're providing is a significant morale boost to the organization. And ultimately, we have still successfully hit targets even while they're on the server warning people. So it's hilarious to me.
One thing I wanted to touch on with this topic is kind of like the whole, what I think what Agents mentioned was the how we go about piracy. Right, there's many different flavors of pirate from what I've run across going on this adventure. Well, one of the reasons that we here at Black Coral play definitely more on the ruthless side of it is just we've definitely tried communicating with people. It's such a pain in the ass. I honestly don't even want to. I might just do everything over VoIP now because I don't want to get in. I think before 3.13 hit, I think I had like 50 direct message channels that I had to tab through. I literally could not hit tab without just like mashing the keyboard for a minute and a half or like 3 minutes straight. It was painful. So there's definitely like, in order to function to some extent, because we get some of the guys over at Black Coral are like bug magnets. I don't know what the hell's going on. They get some of the strangest bugs all the time, and in order for us to just function, sometimes we just have to go in and kill the guy immediately just to make things simple. We've developed a tactic that I've called the 100-meter dash. If the guy gets out of the rock and tries to make a break for the ship, that's the optimal scenario. Don't even let him get in the air, and basically just stop him before he gets on the ship. It just makes things so much easier. But it'll be interesting to see how more people, once those issues kind of get cleared up, to see more how people do more communication-based piracy. I think another element to piracy is how it'll be interesting to see what, I guess, normal professions resort to piracy and say scenarios where they're desperate and they need to potentially be aggressive in order to survive, right? Death of a spaceman type scenario.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Death of a Spaceman, I think whenever it does come, will introduce a whole different dynamic for a lot of piracy and negotiation potential. Because right now, obviously, there's no benefit or I guess no hindrance when you die. But if you end up gaining an extra limb or losing your eyesight or however they're going to implement it when it comes in, everyone I think has to let cooler heads prevail over the long term.
Right.
One of the things that I really like about CIG is that they implemented the consensual PvP button.
Oh, that's an interesting.
It's the consensual PvP button. It's on your RSI launcher. It says launch game.
That's actually an interesting segue, because going back to the discussion on PvP piracy being griefing, like, does it need to be consensual when it comes to doing piracy? Is consensual PvP required for piracy to work?
I think it's like the complete opposite. It's almost like, by definition, consensual PvP would destroy piracy, because unless somebody's, sitting out there, hoping for us to come and hit them for their own jollies, who's going to want to agree to give up their loot, give up their cargo just because?
I think
pirates are much more ambush predators than anything. Like we want to jump on a target without them knowing that we're there, and then just get whatever we need to get done with, and then move on before anybody can actually show up to interrupt it.
I think that piracy is consensual PvP, and maybe this is the wrong perspective of it, but if a target is acting in such a way that they can be tracked, the situation can develop, and forces can maneuver into place without their knowledge, then they either aren't using the tools available to them to do what they want to do without detection, or they lack the knowledge, and therefore they have consented to the actions that will follow.
Yeah, there's definitely a lack of attentiveness when it comes to looking at ships on the radar and stuff like that. I've seen ridiculous scenarios from other pirate content creators where they'll sneak up on a miner with like a carrack or a fucking reclaimer. Like, how do you let that happen? You know what I mean? Like when the reclaimer like lands on top of you and the shadow like literally like envelops the entire area that you're mining in. It's like, well, what? How senseless? Do you have to be to not notice that? I don't know.
It's actually a phenomenon. that is known as target fixation. It's a very natural human instinct, because as much as people say we multitask, we don't. Unless you purposely break from what you're doing and intentionally do a cross check, you're not going to see it. And most players do not incorporate a radar check as part of their cross check.
Right, but there are audio cues. There are little audio cues that you can pick up on.
You are 100%
and then you're like,
right.
What was that sound? Maybe I should check my radar, right? I do that all the time when I'm looking for targets, because we have to keep an eye out for bounty hunters and stuff, because we're usually flying red. Well, sorry, I'm usually flying red.
You're absolutely right. The interface with Star Citizen is the most user-friendly for a PvEer to avoid PvP.
Yeah, the radar picks up a lot of interesting information, especially the 2D radars. They are very, very good at picking up ships. The way that they're like kind of set up, they pretty much always guarantees that if it's actually detectable, that it'll pop up as a little blue dot or red dot on the radar. And honestly, if you can't tell, like, I can't believe that I can sneak up on people when I'm flying red, to be honest, because it especially goes out of your way to mention contact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think on the topic of
there's...
Actually, no, you go, Bitters. You go ahead.
Okay. I mean, we say that there's lots of tools that they can use, but I mean, if we're trying to, bring in the other side a little bit more, there's often going to be times when a player is just playing the game to relax. I mean, I think I've heard from other players that are, go on both sides of the fence, that mining can, in a rock or a prospector can be a relaxing atmosphere, right? So maybe they turn off global chat, maybe they're streaming some Spotify music in, and they're just kind of zoned out, or they're watching Netflix doing their own thing. And that's, how they're unwinding. So despite the tools in front of them, they're playing the game with a different element. So that's why I think we see what we consider to be easier targets often. I mean, you can reference the Scoop Slam video that we have where somebody didn't notice an 890 jump sneak up on them. But I guess, we have to kind of be willing to concede the fact that there's, people that aren't playing with pirates in mind and all those things and aren't PvP orientated, right? So they're the ones that are going to be, getting the brunt of our aggression, because they become the easy targets. They're the ones that are not wanting to travel across, a moon to somewhere safe and do all those things.
True. That's a really good point.
I think something that's kind of lacking though, and it's an understanding of what type of game environment Star Citizen actually is. Because the notion behind consensual PvP, I think, like DT kind of hit it, like, the consensual PvP button is when you launch the game and you join the universe. The persistent universe is supposed to be, an open-ended first-person universe where conflict happens, and it can be either player, generated conflict or AI generated conflict. So in this scenario, and this is something that whenever I hear people turn around and say, oh, like, I didn't want to get pirated, I'm only just logging in to do mining and all that sort of stuff. I'm not interested in, I don't need you guys to be able to do my mining, gameplay loop. And it's like, that's 100% right. You're 100% right. You don't need me there. Thing is, though, is that you're responsible for your own gameplay. You're responsible for your own fun. So if you don't want to get shat on from a great height by a bunch of pirates showing up to steal your shit, then you need to be at least a little bit smarter about what you're doing, and like, don't mine next to the fucking outpost where you're gonna get found.
God, really? That one?
Like, we can understand, like, you want to do mining, that's cool, like, totally support you doing mining, because that means that we've got somebody to pirate. If you don't want to get pirated though, don't mine next to the outpost, don't do dumb shit. Take some responsibility for your own gameplay, because when you hit that launch button, you're accepting your responsibility for your own gameplay at that point. You're logging in to enjoy the game, you're logging in for your own entertainment. We don't, go out, we don't consider the people that we're pirating as entertainment for us. Like, that's, the mindset that I'm creating within Mongrel Squad is like, and it's a reason why I call them targets. Like that's literally what they are. They're just a target to us. It's nothing personal. They have something of value on them. We want to take it. Like, we want that valuable stuff. If we see ships, and we've seen it before, like little Auroras and, Avenger Titans and shit like that, we just ignore them because they're not worth anything to us. We're not like those types of PvP players who just like to murder everything that they see, because that's not valuable to us. But at the same time, like those, people who log in to play and they're in their little Aurora and their Avenger Titan need to understand the type of environment that they're in, where that can happen. And it's been ignorant, and my personal thought is like somewhat emotionally immature when it comes to playing a video game where PvP can actually happen, that you're sitting there getting upset that it happened to you when you didn't want it to, but you didn't take any sort of measures to reduce its chances. One of the things like that needs to be understood is that it can happen anywhere. Realistically, you can take measures to reduce the opportunity of it happening to you, but the reality is that if it happens, then like, you can try and fight back, you can try and negotiate, you've got options. But at the end of the day, like, you're responsible for your own fun in the game. We're not responsible for our target's fun. If they enjoy the experience of getting pirated, which some people do, because it breaks up the monotony of what they were doing, and they don't feel bad when they lose their stuff, because they're like, that was a really cool experience. I just had, like 3 EMP ships show up, a bloody glowing red ball in the sky, and 4 guys just charged up the ramp of my Cutlass and, are holding me at gunpoint. Some people, that entire scenario there sounds really cool, and people are like, yeah, that's awesome, I want that to happen. Other people are like, no, I want to just chill out, listen to, Spotify while I'm just there breaking rocks, making the numbers of my wallet get bigger. Where it starts, like, and this is one of the things that we kind of haven't touched on when it comes to like piracy being griefing. And this is the point about if we see the same target again. So normally, this is one of those things where a lot of people have a, firm rule, and I'm a bit looser with it. If we see
Before we switch topics,
go ahead.
Can I just share a quick tale, and then if you want to cut it, by all means, if you don't think it's germane.
Yeah, share it.
So this is more along the lines of consensual PvP and the effects. One of the things that hit on me about it was whether or not you feel bad about something. And I thought this was interesting because, one of the things I want to make sure everybody understands is that pirates are players too. They're not this evil entity of soulless creatures that play this game and the boogeyman that exists in the nether regions of Star Citizen. So yes. We have a heart. And just last week, the org was engaged in a hit. And we recognized after we were engaged in the hit that the target was a day old. And they had a caterpillar. Kind of odd, for a person to have a caterpillar. Sometimes people will be like, oh, that's their trading alt. But with everything that was going on, this guy did not know what he was doing. He was having a hard time figuring out which building to go into. He could only fill up like a small portion of his first compartment. So had all the indicators of somebody that was brand new to the game. So we engaged the target in piracy. They actually answered their comms. So that in itself is like 1 in 10. I will tell you, for anybody that's listening, answer your comms. You'll probably make out better, because most of us are in it because we enjoy the challenge. And if you answer your comms, it's usually a better option for you. So we engaged him. They were super polite. They were cooperative. They didn't know what they were doing, and we were walking them through, and they did everything we asked them to. At the end of the engagement, we asked for a very small sum. And then somebody pointed out the guy was a day old. As a result, without realizing it, half the people on the hit sent this dude funds. And it's probably as a result because of another piracy hit we used using information warfare as part of the community interaction, and received a giant windfall of money, and most of the members of the org have more funds they know what to do with. But they sent this guy funds as a result, because he was so cooperative. We were able to get the content we wanted, and we recognized that he was new to the game. We didn't want to ruin his playing experience. And he was so appreciative and thankful after the fact. So, there's a very valuable lesson there. We're all players in this community together. We're all looking to have fun. We're not trying to ruin your fun. Sometimes that happens as part of us having our fun. No apologies.
I will say,
I mean, part of that. Go ahead, Agents.
I was just gonna say, it comes down to that point that I made about taking responsibility for your own fun. And part of the reason why we have been putting our videos out there on YouTube is to educate the community on what can happen, because I can tell you now, it'd be 2 years ago now, if you got on Spectrum and you started talking about piracy being a legitimate profession, you just get shouted down by all the Spectrum dwelling Care Bears there. And it was a bit of an uphill battle to get to that point of having it accepted. But the best proof that we could provide of piracy being something that you can do in the game is by just showing it in action. And a lot of people who aren't focused on piracy at all don't really want much to do with it. They are keen to be pirated, to see to test their mettle to a certain degree. But it's a good point where we go out of our way to do piracy. It's not really that profitable in the grand scheme of things in comparison to mining, or when it works, cargo hauling, or at the moment bounty hunting. If we really wanted to make credits, then we would do those activities, and we'd probably excel at them because of the level of organization that we have. But we do piracy for the experience. I've said it before, Mongrel Squad's building up its skill sets to be able to do piracy better later when it actually matters. And we can't make as many mistakes as what we can now. But when it comes to focusing on ensuring that the experience is fun for everyone, it's not a requirement on our part to do that. And it's an argument that I've seen brought up by PvE players before, where they've turned around and gone, well, you need to do it this way so the experience is better for the PvE player. It's no, I don't. I don't have to do a damn thing that you say. I'm here to take your shit, and that's all I care about. If you want a better experience, then you need to step forward as well and engage. Which is why, in that sort of scenario, I'm not surprised that the guys turned around and went, oh shit, this is a day-old account. He's got a cat, which is really weird, but he engaged in dialogue. He was polite. He paid out. It's well, we don't need the credits. After our anti-piracy meme effort, we're not hurting for credits at the moment. We're really just doing it for the experience, for the gameplay, for the fun. And it's one of those scenarios where it's oh, dude, do you need credits? There you go, take it. We don't need it, not now. But
I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of goes back to the thing that I mentioned from the previous topic, is using piracy as a way to fund your ability to PvP. Right, you don't need to make a lot of money if you make enough money to buy the ship parts or components or whatever, right, that make your ability to do the thing that you want better, right? So if you're in a warlock, right, and you say do a solo hit, and you get a Novikov's worth of Hadnite to run off with, right? You can go sell that, you get 40k or whatever the hell it's worth, and then you can go buy some ship components with that, and you can make that warlock perform better at that job, right? You don't need to be strapped with cash. You just need enough to make the ship that you're doing, whatever role you're playing, function better at that job.
Bitters, you had a point that you wanted to bring up before I cut you off?
Oh, no worries, man. I was thinking about it because you're mentioning sort of our perspective, what we're in it for, that it's nothing personal on our end. And, I would kind of like ask people on the other side to kind of, consider, the whole idea of grieving and its impact on you, to the point where maybe like even being grieved is essentially your own state of mind. Like, there's a kind of an infamous Spectrum poster, who's recently banned again, I think. But, he had posted a bunch of screenshots and documentation of all the salt and toxicity that, came out of his, PvP and griefing activities and all the horrible things that get said. And I was thinking, I'm like, these people that are saying these things are on the other side that are taking this very, difficult, very personal. Don't need to. Like, at the end of the day, even if you're getting pirated, even if you're getting harassed, it's a game. If you're getting pad rammed, you could switch servers. If you're getting pirated, it's going to cost you like, anywhere from 50 to 120, 200,000 credits. It's like, these aren't really big, life-changing things to let yourself get so full of anger and lash out. If most people just kind of took everything in stride, it seems like a lot of the conversations we have around, PvP and griefing wouldn't be as, high strung.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue that you kind of started to lean into. We're not asking for much, but what's at risk is something people don't take into account. The constant thing that I hear is, I don't negotiate with pirates, as if they're replacing the word pirate with terrorists. Fine.
Yeah.
That's your perspective. But just know, your cat that's filled with 1.7 million credits worth of Laranite is totally worth the 200K I'm asking for. You're still going to make 120K profit margin. And I know that because I used to run that. So there's a benefit. Most of the pirates that are really good at hunting the traders are because they once traded themselves. And then when they ask these questions, they look for what is an amount that I can ask you for, since I have you totally powerless, and still give you enough of a profit margin to walk out of this with a lesson. So it's
the amount of sorry, I didn't. The amount of times the amount of times that we've done any ransom, it's honestly been, it's so cheap. It's like 20, 30, like I think the highest we usually go is like 40K. Like, that's nothing. That's chump change. And they'll still tell us to screw off or whatever. When they have 100K, 160K worth of Hadanite or more in their rock, it's like, take the deal. It's a great deal. We leave, you live, and you get to keep mining. But they'll still tell you to screw off or not even say anything.
Yeah, it's interesting how many people are willing to like cut off their nose despite their face in these situations. Like, we've seen it on the cargo haulers, and I recall a situation the other week where we had seen a target, loading up a carrack full of ships. Like, they clearly had invested some amount of time and effort to build this, fleet for some activity they had planned. And to keep the long story short, we were able to get on the ship and take control of the ship. And the ask was going to be like, I think 30, 40,000 credits for all the time they had invested in this activity. And then they could go on their merry way. And as soon as that ask was made, the owner went livid. He, just started getting very angry in chat, and eventually led to the point where he's like, I'll put a 2 million bounty on these pirates for anyone that wants to come. And he eventually lost his ship and complained about losing an hour of his time. For 40,000 credits, that could have been avoided.
They're willing to pay a $2 million bounty to get you guys killed.
Did any of you guys pick that up?
I don't get it.
Did you get any of the guys to grab that bounty just in case? Make 2 million out of it?
Well, we had tried that. We had some nearby support that was willing to torpedo the carrack as soon as the guy said yeah, but it's in those situations too where I'd almost trust the pirate more. That's clearly his profession, to follow through with his negotiation, than the random angry target that, is putting out a ridiculous number in chat, that has also like no reason to follow through with their bounty.
I want to clarify something. So Bitters mentioned something, could be taken out of context. The torpedo was only for the 2 million hit, not for the 40,000. Everybody was going to disengage and absolutely leave the target alone for the 40,000 payout. The 2 million was to
Like the price of my head.
yeah. So after shooting Bitters in the head, we collect the 2 million, and then we torp the Carrack. It's like, okay, you're going to play along with the 2 million and then leave you where you are. Just, I know there's people that are going to jump all over this after the fact.
I think, though, it kind of goes back into that point that I was talking about in regards to, like, taking charge or taking responsibility for your own gameplay. Because I struggled with this mindset as well for a while, where I just, I couldn't comprehend why these people would just do it. Like, cut off their nose to spite their face, tell us to go fuck off, and, I won't negotiate with terrorists. It's like, dude, we're pirates. We're motivated by, credits, not by political ideals. And it took a while to come around to the mindset where it's like, all right, well, they're choosing to play the game the way that they want. I don't understand it. I don't understand why they're getting so angry about it, but if they want to get angry about it, they want to be like that, it's like, hey man, you do you play the game that you want to play. Just understand that you're in an environment where this can happen, and if you don't like that, that's on you to take the measures to make sure it doesn't happen to you. Because we prepare as pirates to do piracy. When we, create our builds, when we buy all our kit, when we get everybody together and we organize a time and place, we do our research by watching what all the cargo haulers and all the miners are, doing all that sort of stuff. We prepare to do piracy. So when it comes to the people that we're pirating, they need to understand that they need to be prepared for that scenario as well. And a lot of them don't consider that. And I strongly believe that part of the reason behind that is a lack of education from CIG, because until CIG, says like, this is piracy and this is how it works, everybody's just going to continuously call us griefers. The community is swaying, further and further over to like recognizing piracy as a legitimate profession. We're always going to have those detractors out there that are going to call us griefing assholes anyway. And it's like, well, yeah, we're pirates. If you get upset by that, technically, you experiencing that grief to that sort of level, that's on you. But this is allowed within the rule set. This is intended game design. We're not breaking any of the rules. We're not doing anything that's not intended. Like, we're playing the game the way that we want to, and you can either engage in that or you don't. In the end, you make that decision. If you want to call us names and that's fine. Like, you're just another, you're literally just somebody that we will laugh at and then move on to finding the next target. Like, it's one of those things, and that's one of the other reasons why, like I say, target instead of person, because that's literally what they are. They're just a target to us.
Right. It's not like we have a list and we're checking names off of it or anything. It's like, it's literally opportunity, just targets of opportunity, like who we find when we're out looking, and we just know where to look because we practice at that, and we try things, and we test ourselves and trying to actually like get the job done. And like you said earlier, honestly, I would honestly say like 80% of the targets that I find are right there at the HDMS station or within 20 kilometers of the HDMS station. Like, I literally, like, basically it's a little bit more refined now, but when we first were starting, we were literally just warping to one of the mining outposts, dialing the scanner to like ×8, and then just scanning towards the station. We get a ping, there's something there, right? We go check it out. It's some dude just dicking around the station way too close, where he could be way further off and not be detected, or be running a stealth fit and be way harder to detect. But they didn't try anything. They're just, They just basically rolled out of bed and were just laying there on the floor, essentially, in terms of distance from where everything is.
Gentlemen, I 100% agree with you, but I have to share a little bit of guilt. I have hit the same target multiple times before, not intentionally. Intentionally hit them, but not because of who they are. Because
Right.
in my calculus, I like to think of it as Albert Einstein's famous quote: "Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, is the definition of insanity." So if I literally just hit you in a cutlass, rock mining, and you go get another cutlass and go to the exact same outpost and do the exact same thing you were just doing, I'm going to hit you again. If you change your methodology, I'm going to leave you alone. And I have absolutely no remorse in hitting you over and over again if you stay in the same area doing the same thing and the same methodology, because you're not learning. And so I kind of look at that point that I will take the opportunity to benefit from your hard work, and potentially you will benefit by changing your methodology.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You have to wonder sometimes.
That's a good point you made about, like, you know,
I was gonna say, like, in that particular scenario, because I know for a fact that we're gonna have people that'll say, "Oh, that's griefing," you know, like you've hit the same person more than once. And the CIG has actually come out and said, like, if you keep going back to the same spot where you were engaged in PvP when you didn't want it, and you just kept going back there, that's on you. You're just being an idiot. Like, it's that scenario where it's like, you know, DT said it, bloody Einstein's quote, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, the definition of insanity. And you couldn't claim, like, and some brilliant PvEers have, you know, like, got in their mind that if, you know, after they get hit once, if they get hit more than once in the same spot, they can start claiming that you're griefing them. It's like, no, that's not how this works, mate. You need to understand, like, if you keep coming back here expecting a different result, then you're an idiot and you're going to get hit, and you need to learn the lesson that's being taught here. If you want to keep handing over you want to do a bit of mining and then lose it all to pirates, that's fine. Or if you want to try and come up with an arrangement with those pirates so that you can mine in that area, pay a bit of credits to them so that they leave you alone, that's cool as well. But if you're expecting to just go back to doing exactly what you were doing before, like, buddy, thumb and bum, iron and neutral, doing, you know, your little mining thing, expecting not to get pirated, then once again, like, that's on you. I'm sorry, but as you were going to say something?
Just kind of on the thoughts of, like, learning from being pirated and that nature that DT brought up. It's amazing sort of how some of the people are, you know, going out of their way not to learn those lessons. You know, I can think of two things that come to mind really quick. Was we hit a cat last week, and the guy was maybe relatively new, but he, you know, had a whole bunch of cargo in there. It was almost full. He had all of his money in there, so he couldn't pay a ransom. And eventually we, you know, decided to blow up the ship for the boxes because he couldn't pay, only because somebody in global chat offered him, I think it was like 400,000 credits, not to pay the pirates, to get his cargo value back, essentially. And I, you know, took a step back and looked at that and just kept thinking that this guy lost his caterpillar because he, you know, did some unsafe things in terms of trying to avoid pirates. And he got bailed out from somebody in global chat, which is fine. It's not much skin off our back. We mentioned before, we don't really do this for the money at this point. But this guy, you know, he never had to have, I guess, like the sting of loss of losing that cargo and having to rebuild it back. And now he's never going to learn that lesson. He's never been incented to change his ways. He's, you know, going to go right back to doing the same run because, you know, somebody bailed him out. And similarly, even guys that should be doing this for a long time, there's one streamer that comes to mind that likes to run Caterpillar cargo. And there was an instance where I boarded his ship just coming up with him on the elevator, checked his hold, saw that it was empty, got off the ship. Went back, I think it was with a couple other mongrels. We were stalking a rock miner. I ended up circling back to the same outpost, maybe 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, and he was back there with the caterpillar again. But this time I caught him after he bought cargo. We still went up the elevator together, and I got in his pilot chair, and we had control of the ship. Within a half an hour of him noticing a pirate get on his ship, he didn't change his MO one iota, and it resulted in him losing the ship.
I think in those sorts of scenarios, like those are, for us, they're funny stories, but it also highlights a bit of a mentality that, I guess, doesn't really get exposed too often. Is just the decision making that certain players make when it comes to how they're playing their game loop. I always keep coming back to this point: people taking responsibility for their own gameplay. If that's how they want to play, that's on them. But if they start complaining about, like them getting pirated or them getting destroyed or anything like that, like, realistically, like, we just laugh about it, and just look at them like, they're an idiot. And that's one of the things, I guess, that the other side of the fence kind of needs to realize as well. Like, all those hardcore PvE players that are sitting there going, like, fuck you guys, I'm going to self-destruct my ship and all that sort of stuff. Take as many of yous down with me as possible. It's like, that's how you want to go, that's alright, but we try and make sure that we're prepared for it. If you catch us off guard, fine, fair play, but you're just another dickhead in the great line of dickheads that we've had to deal with before us doing piracy. You're nothing new to the encounter that we've just experienced. And when we press that same launch button, we're consenting to that being a potential outcome. So we already go in with the knowledge that that could happen. Unlike that person who wasn't expecting to get pirated because they still think that Star Citizen is that single player, first person universe experience. I think we've spoken about this particular topic enough. Did you have something to say, DT?
Yeah, it's just you mentioned the thing that was funny, and I had a thought. I find it especially funny when people jump on to Spectrum, and they talk about how they're getting excessively killed over and over again, and they have this argument that I've been killed multiple times and it's griefing, but when they start to break it down and look at the formula, it's just like you said, they're going back to the same place and it's happening. So I find the argument itself egotistical. It's a level of self-centeredness that borders on narcissism. It's the idea that a group of people are sitting on a communication server waiting for the individual crying on Spectrum to log in, just to mobilize and attack them, and their entire play is focused on that person logging in. It's just like somebody that gets all upset with road rage when they get cut off, and they get so furious that person that cut them off, as if that person that cut them off on the road woke up that morning and said, you know what, I've decided I'm getting up, I'm going to get right in front of DT's car and I'm going to cut him off today. That's my whole goal in life. It's that same level of preposterousness that cracks me up.
You don't get up in the morning purposely to do that? Cut people off on the highway?
Maybe I live a very fulfilling life and I have a myriad of different things that I'm so thankful for far outside of such things. Maybe I should narrow my focus, but no, I don't.
It's definitely interesting looking into the mindset of like players who get pirated. But once again, I think it's probably a good time to move on to the next topic, because if we stare too much into the darkness, we'll start going mad. Alright, so the next topic that we're going to be talking about is how far is too far when it comes to PvP and piracy. Now, this particular topic, I want to make this part clear. This particular topic actually comes out of the situation where CIG had put out a bunch of warnings to a wide range of PvP players and banned a few. it's interesting. I'll say that this happened, especially considering that the first email that got sent out for warnings mentioned excessive player killing, and then it turned out that it was about targeted harassment, which are two completely different things. But I'll open this up to the floor now.
Go ahead and jump on this one. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about. From my perspective, I don't see gamer tags, I see targets. You have a profile that you operate in. If that profile intersects with what I am targeting, then you are a potential target. If you don't adjust that profile, I will continue to hit you as many times as you fit within the intersection of what I am searching for and your profile, your play style profile allows. As soon as you change, I'll stop hitting you. Really what it comes down to. And if you feel at any time that you're being excessively hit by targeting, I would recommend reviewing some of the tips that CoconutJones mentioned about paying attention to your radar, reviewing your recordings, and listening to the perspectives that Bitters mentioned about doing some internal reflection on your mind state, and then looking at some of the points that Agents mentioned about CIG's perspective on what is griefing, and kind of do some assessment over where you sit.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Death Toll's saying. And maybe like my take on some of this is on a tangent, but the letters about like excessive player killing that went out, when I first saw those, I, tried to take a step back and reflect on, what have I been doing as a pirate? And, am I going to start getting letters down the road on this stuff? Because there's sometimes situations that we engage in that might fit the bill of, excessive player killing, given that there wasn't, a fixed definition to it. Anecdotally, that hit I mentioned where we took over the Carrack full of ships. To do that on a Carrack, you typically need to take over the med bay, where the med bed is. And to hold the ship, you have to kill the player again and again and again until they either, don't spawn there anymore, or if they leave the server, or they pay the outcome. So in our case, we were looking for a ransom. They weren't going to pay it, so we had threatened to blow up the ship. But in waiting for our ability to blow up the ship, we probably had to kill them, 20 times in that bed. So reflecting on that, does that seem like that crosses a line? I have my take on that, but maybe I'll turn it to the floor here to see, people's takes.
Yeah, the term excessive player killing kind of doesn't make sense in the context of like a sandbox game. I kind of wish that they rephrased it to what they actually mean, which is like spawn camping, but not med bay, like not in the situation you just said where there's like a ship with a med bay. There's only 3 of them, so it's kind of a rare scenario to run into. Like station, you know what I mean? Like what does excessive player killing even mean, right? How do you define that even more so? I would say it's like spawn camping people at like PO or Everest, to the point where you're just shooting and not even just letting them fly off, like float around in the armistice zone or come at you or whatever, like literally just shooting the ship. Like every ship that you see spawn on the pads because you can. You know what I mean? It doesn't... excessive player killing is kind of too generic because, like you said, there's scenarios inside legitimate PvP or piracy situations where, well, either the guy's coming back to the fucking battleground again for whatever reason, mm-hmm. or you're aboard the Carrack or the 890 and you've got to kill, right? To add to the stories here, us over at Black Coral got into a couple situations recently where we got to hijack 890s, 2 890s recently actually, and in one of them, we had to go through a big, or I guess I was the only one on board. I had to go through a big phase of like medbay games, like you said, where he was killing me a bunch of times and I was killing them a bunch of times, all to try and just take control of the medbay and set one of ourselves up in a situation where we could just continue the PvP as was designed, right? They had actually set up a bounty on people in their own org to try and get the server to come at them, and it fucking worked. It turned into a jump town scenario, right? So everyone was murdering everybody in a situation like that. Is that griefing? Like, obviously they drove it to the point where people came, but right, from the devs' perspective, hovering overboard with all their tools and the ability to watch what we're doing, or like, you know what I mean, that kind of information gathering, right? How do you determine what's excessive out in the overall universe?
I kind of look at it from a business perspective. SIG is a business. They need to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a product, and that's the game. And they have a customer base, and that's the players. So I look at it as anything that is going to directly impact the development of their customer base is not compatible with the game. So if you're targeting players that are in the early stages and you're ruining their gameplay to the point where they're just going to walk away, because I don't know about you, but I've always looked at the first 2 weeks of any game as being the most critical. That's where you're going to decide whether or not you want to stick around. Some people see it as the first weekend. So if their experience in the first weekend or the first 2 weeks is just pure grief central, they're not going to come back, and that's why that they're charged to prevent that sort of griefing. But if you, of your own accord, get yourself a ship and fly out someplace that is known hostile territory, and you're being spawn camped in your bed when there is a metric and procedure in place that allows you to reclaim that ship and take off and go someplace else, that's a little bit different. That's my thought.
So I've been in this scenario before where I've actually done this exact same tactic multiple times, and I don't see it as excessive player killing. Like, we have an objective there. It's not like I'm doing it just to keep them there, for shits and giggles.
Right.
I want to engage in dialogue. I engage in dialogue. They don't listen. They try and get out of the bed when I tell them to stay in the bed. They try and get out. I shoot them. They wake back up in the bed. This keeps repeating until they either do what I want, or somebody else intervenes, or they leave the server. Now, some people may turn around and say, oh, well, you're preventing them from playing the game. It's like, well, no, I'm not. I've given them simple instructions, and there's a condition behind it. If they want to comply with those instructions, that's on them. Pretty much, the thing about piracy, and it kind of goes back into that consensual side of things, and why it's kind of irrelevant, is that we don't have to do it, but we can present a choice. When we pirate someone, we can present a choice to them and go, you can do what I say or suffer the consequences. And after that point, it's on them making a decision. So if they want to be dumb, and keep coming back, and you're just, your hands forced again, and you got to kill them, and they just keep doing it over and over again, that's on them. When it starts becoming excessive is when you chase them to the next server and do it again, and you chase them to the next server and do it again, and it stops being about you trying to pirate someone and you just going out of your way to kill that person, disrupt their gameplay, and that the objective changes, and that's something that kind of needs to be recognized, because war is supposed to be a thing that happens in Star Citizen, and people, a significant portion of the PvP community are concerned about this at the moment, where war has to be between two consenting parties. They have to consent to it, and it's like, well, when resources start becoming a thing and we're all on that bloody, server meshing becomes a thing, the servers aren't going to be a bloody campfire where everybody's singing Kumbaya. People are going to want more of what's there, and there's not going to be as much of whatever is there. So fighting is going to happen, and people want that. There are going to be others who don't want that, and they don't have to go to those areas, or if they want to, they need to accept that they're going into an area where they're going to have to fight, or they can hire someone to do the fighting for them. And that's one of the other things as well. And, you know, one of the reasons why I always talk about, like, PvP presents player agency. And it presents it for those who don't want to engage in PvP as well, where they could utilize their opportunity to hire those who do want to engage in PvP to do so on their behalf. But yeah, in your scenario, Bitters, I would say without a doubt, like, that's not excessive player killing. And CIG would probably go, you know what, nah, that guy's being a dickhead. You know, you're good to go. That being said though, it's always important that you make it clear to whoever you're talking to what your intent is. Because if you just show up in a ship and you just start blasting away in there, they wake up in that medbay and you just blast them again, and you just keep doing that until, you know, they decide to leave. That's when you start, like, that's when I start taking some issue to it. Because it's one of those scenarios where it's like, you know, why are you doing this? Are you just trying to get off the ship?
Yeah, especially with a Carrack or an 890, because it's at that point, actually, when you set your medbay, you're kind of stuck in the ship. You can't just backspace and then go to your station that you spawned in, right? You're sort of trapped in that scenario. Whenever we do that kind of heist, there's usually an objective to get something out of it. The Carrack is our white whale, so to speak. We've tried to capture a couple of those damn things, and they're a pain in the ass. And even if you can get on board, or you get somebody on board and try and get a ransom out of it, it can be challenging to make any of that work. And especially if you have to get to the point where you're literally killing them in the med bay, then yeah, like you're kind of forced to. But you have to, like you said, you have to make that objective known, because it could definitely be looked at like excessive if you're not letting them know, yo, you're being pirated. We're in control of your capital ship, and we want to be paid to leave.
Like that Coconut Jones mentioned, if you're flying a Carrack, you won't be pirated, is what I heard there. But in all seriousness, as part of some self-reflection, I had a little bit of a small epiphany here from some comments that Agents just had when he said, I gave them instructions and they did not follow them, and so that's why they're dead. I think this is great, because, you know, sitting on the opposite side of the aisle and trying to find that shared understanding with our targets, we both have a problem with authority. I can totally empathize with that, and I understand where you're coming from, and so we can start a dialogue there.
Yeah, I think, and that's once again like that point, and that's where I kind of came to the realization myself, and this was a while back when I was trying to work out, you know, like why are these people, you know, like not paying? Like we reduced the price of our ransoms to ridiculously low, you know, values, like 1,000 credits. You pay 1,000 credits and we'll give you your ship back. And like, nah, fuck you. I'd rather self-destruct. It's like, what? And it was kind of, you know, getting to that realization where it was like, they made a decision. We've presented a choice. They've made a decision. And, you know, like, they don't want to, you know, do what we say. And it's like, all right, fair enough. Whatever reason you're deciding to do that, that's on you. You know, more power to you. We'll just find another target. In this sort of scenario, though, like when we're talking about, you know, like how far is too far when it comes to PvP and piracy, you know, like excessive player killing. I remember when I saw it in a tweet first, and I'm sitting there going, oh shit, because I woke up, saw in a Discord that, you know, there was a tweet about this, looked at the tweet, and I'm like, oh, well, I'll check my email to see if we got one, because I'm like, well, we do piracy and we're putting our videos out on YouTube fucking 3 times a week, so, you know, like, and a lot of those hits end up in players dying, so it's like, you know, I guess we could technically be considered excessive player killers if, you know, from a certain point of view. So did we get a email? I was a little bit disappointed that I didn't get one, because I'm like, maybe I'm not killing enough people. got to up the game a bit. And it was, interesting watching those who did get those warnings, and they're all just sitting there going, what the fuck does this mean? Like, how are we, killing people excessively? And then when, they saw clarification from CIG, and it turned out they worded it poorly, and it was supposed to be targeted harassment. And then they were just as confused, because they're like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by targeted harassment? Like, did somebody complain that we're, hitting them too much? Or, fighting them too much? Like, what does that mean? And, like, it alluded to stream sniping. That's what it was alluding to. Targeted harassment against people who were streaming. So they're showing their position, and, like, these PvPers would go out and go to those areas and engage them. And it's one of those scenarios where it's like, it's a shit thing to happen. But at the same time, like, player agency should really be taking control here. Targeted harassment, can take many different forms, but it needs to be something that has to be done over a long period of time, really, to be clear that you're actually being targeted. Because it's one of those scenarios where it's like, if you're going back to the same place over and over again, and we're going to that exact same place over and over again, that's literally circumstantial. Like, we know that, for example, on Ariel, the 2 outposts there are good for Laranite traders. So if caterpillars start showing up on our servers at those places, it's only a matter of time before we start seeing the same faces over and over again. Are we, is that target harassment because we're operating in an area where caterpillars are operating? Because those are our targets, and it just happens to be that those same people are showing up over and over again? No, not really, because we'll go back to the previous point about somebody doing the same thing over and over again expecting a different result. Somebody going back to that same outpost to do their cargo hauling, and they get pirated again by us. And it's like, dude, are you gonna try and do anything different? Like, at least get somebody in a turret or something, or hire escorts or do something like that. But sitting there,
it's amazing how much a difference that does.
Yeah,
having a dude in the turret chill, like, that can throw off a plan so quickly.
And that's kind of like where people need to understand, like, targeted harassment versus, like, you just being a dumbass and going back to the same place over and over again. It's like, take a bit of responsibility for your own gameplay. But once again, like, technically I've been the subject of targeted harassment in Star Citizen. When you go back to that story, I was telling about that security org that was going out of their way to actually find me to prevent me from doing piracy. I don't blame them for doing it, like, because it was content for them. When they had done all the PvE stuff, they saw an opportunity where it's like other players who are doing that PvP, like, game loop that they want to try and counter. That they, like, we're the bad guys for them. That's what they wanted, out of it. Just for us to be the bad guys. To a certain degree, it was interesting at times, especially when they would show up and we'd just kick the shit out of them. But it got to a point where it was like, we were being interrupted from doing piracy so much that, like, it stopped being about being piracy, and we're just fighting these guys all the time, which was fine for them. That's exactly what they wanted, but that's not what we wanted. We wanted to do piracy. So, we had to, like, readjust our mindset and how we operated, and started changing the way that we did things. Once again, not running red, moving frequently, playing on different servers, and if we started seeing them showing up, we'd try and bait them into ambushes and just absolutely obliterate them, then leave the server, to frustrate them, to like, try and deny them the victories that they were looking for. And those are all tactics that we looked at employing to mitigate against that targeted harassment. But there is a certain point where it's like, look, you either talk to the people about it and go, hey, you know, like, this needs to stop, you're being dickheads, or you know, you go to CIG and go, look, these guys are being dickheads and they're just trying to chase me down and they're just attacking me all the time. You know, regardless of where I go, regardless of what I do. You know, I try changing it up, I get, you know, I'm still getting attacked. But there's another thing that people also need to understand, and that's not fucking goading those who are doing the targeted harassment as well. And this was something that I was guilty of to start off with, because, you know, I saw it as a bit of fun, and these guys kind of took it as, you know, like, consent to continue doing it. You know, and from a certain
Right.
you know, point of view, it's like, well, if I'm going to continue engaging these guys in doing this, then of course they're going to keep coming back because they're getting the content that they're looking for. So I have to change what I'm doing in order to prevent this from happening. Or at least change it so that it happens less frequently. Because the reality is that as pirates, especially when we get server meshing, that shit's going to become more commonplace. You know, like, we won't be able to camp, you know, outposts, sitting, you know, 6 kilometers out from an outpost, but with our shields and weapons off, hiding our signature, because those places are going to be full of security organizations patrolling. And we'll have to do our hits elsewhere, and you know, we're going to have to be quick with our hits. And if they start seeing us in an area, if they just get a whiff of us in the area, they will start hunting for us and looking for us. They will try and embed spies in our organization to make it easier for them to track us down. That's all stuff that's going to happen
Definitely.
in the future. We got a bit of a preview to it. What, it would have been 2019 when this happened. So it was definitely an interesting, you know, experience reflecting on it. Towards the end of it, I was kind of getting jack of what was actually happening, and, you know, like, worked out a strategy that eventually frustrated them into stopping, which, you know, was a bit annoying for us, but we did it enough times that they just stopped. When it comes to, like, understanding, though, like, that targeted harassment thing, like, there's the person doing the harassing, and then there's the person getting harassed. And it's one of those situations, again, where you have to take responsibility for your own gameplay, for your own fun. So, you know, like, do what you can do first to mitigate against the situation. If it gets to a point where it's like everything that you're doing isn't working, and that includes talking to the people and saying, hey, you know, this is ridiculous, what do you want? And if it turns out, like, you know, they're being malicious with, you know, why they're targeting you, that's when you can go to CIG and go, hey, you know, like, I am actually being targeted and I'm getting, you know, griefed by these people. Otherwise, you know, like, try and find the solution in game. So, like, you might actually have a lot more fun with it than you realize. A lot of people who engage in PvP are just looking for, you know, like, that experience where, you know, like, they're challenging themselves against opponents that they normally, you know, that they're not sure that they might be able to beat. They might, you know, they might not. And the thing about it is like, PvP as an experience itself is a bit of an end game, because once you've mastered the AI, like, the next best thing is fighting other people who can act in, you know, less predictable ways. And then there's the, you know, like, everything else that happens associated with PvP gameplay, you know, like what Jones mentioned at the start, talking about the pretty much the industrial creation of you know, having to replace everything that you lose, having to, you know, like, employ those who are more interested in doing the stuff that you don't want to do, because, you know, like, I bought Star Citizen to do piracy. I don't care about doing mining or cargo hauling or anything like that. I'll do it to learn about the mechanics. I'll do it to make some extra coin if I need it, if piracy's not paying out. But if I need to replace equipment and I need coin, but I don't have, like the patience nor the time to be doing the mining and stuff like that, it would make better business sense for me to get those who enjoy doing that to do that for me, and we split profits. I feel like I'm
definitely
talking a bit too much here. What are your guys' thoughts?
I'll jump in. I think I think there is something you mentioned in the last segment that you nailed. Was like there's a certain mindset, right, with kind of the PvE community, and I think a decent part of that, especially for the more like pacifist, like pure pacifist PvEers that don't want anything to do with combat at all. I think they look around, right, these moons and these mining outposts, and they see, right, there's a safe zone, so I should be safe there. I think these safe zones kind of like feed this false sense of safety around these moons. I wish there was more of a dynamic kind of like safety system, because right now, like, Stanton is supposed to be like a secure, right, space. It's supposed to be kind of like under the I mean, in the little intro loading screen thing, right, it gives you a bunch of little background text and whatever. At the very bottom, it says the UE and the corporations are striving to bring peace to the system, meaning they're trying to, get it into a state of peace, not that it's already in it. I wish there was like, say, like a system where it was like green to red, kind of like where EVE Online, but more, because in EVE it's like there's like this system is 0.6 or 0.5 or whatever, and if it's 0.4 or lower, it's low security, and you can shoot one another there without consequences or as many. I wish it was kind of like that, but on just like a planetary object sort of scale. So like, say Everest Harbor, Port Alisar, like, are green. They're going to get the quickest response times. They're going to have the heaviest defenses. They're going to be the most secure, right? Same thing with, like, say, Lorville or Area 18 or whatever. But if you go to the little moon over to the side, right, that's maybe, like, for the sake of argument, orange or something, right? There's maybe some defenses around the bases and the outposts and stuff, and maybe the UE will get there at some point, but it's going to take more of a logistics to actually get to the moon and then get to the little base and then find you, right? It'll take more time, especially if there's no armistice zones there. I think the armistice zones actually kind of hurt both the PvE side of things and the PvP side of things, because I think one of the reasons that they loosened up the armistice zone in the around PO is so people could actually defend themselves against players, right? I think the same thing kind of needs to happen around those little HDMS bases, because you can just camp inside and be like, well, I'm safe. What are you going to do about it? There's nothing really that would make sense, though, in terms of why that base is safe. There's no defenses around it. There's nothing there, really. It's a bunch of buildings in the middle of the desert.
Guarded by one guy behind the desk, right?
There isn't even a guy behind the desk. You know what I mean?
Sometimes there is. I agree with what you're saying.
I've never. Yeah.
Particularly on like the sanctity of like the armistice zone on these like HDMS outpost style areas, right? Because being in an armistice zone, you get the big flash, on your screen that you're entering one. Definitely can create an interpretation of, oh, this is my safety bubble. We're not going to fire weapons in here, but that's about it. You can still commit crime there, and there are game mechanics that you can use to engage in piracy and conflict in that area, right? So it's an interesting kind of, I think, question on like what should the armistice zone, even in the current iteration, represent, right? Like, is it going to be considered griefing to continue to engage on a target as they've landed their ship safely into an armistice zone? Because there's means to get that ship out of there, to try to board the ship. And I mean, even to some capacity, should the target, have a realistic expectation that if they're being pursued by a fleet of pirates that sliding themselves into an invisible bubble of quote unquote safety at an abandoned outpost. Like, is that a realistic expectation that suddenly all of this will back off and you're safe suddenly?
Right. No, it makes no logical sense at all. And in fact, like pirates can actually, like outlaws and stuff, can actually take advantage of the situation because say you do land, right? And this is something that I think agents brought up in the last Mongrel Court was that you can, right? So say they do land, okay? Well, you can land right next to them, wait for them to open the ramp, get on board the ship. The moment you're on board the ship, there's nothing they can do about it, right? What are they going to do? You can literally just steal the stuff right in front of them. You can take the ship and fly off with it. They can't kill you. They can't stop you. They can't actually fight back, right? That's the biggest issue I see is that it creates these bubbles of safe space, right, for the people. Like the PvEer can't actually defend himself in the area, but we can still take full advantage of the situation just because the game mechanics are kind of just slapped together and not really refined.
Really like this point because it kind of brings into an idea that I had that I think CIG may potentially want to consider, and that's granted we're arguing reality and logic over a science fiction game. Okay, I understand that,
right.
But in a science fiction game, if your weapons are laser based, there's a significant amount of power involved in that, and you could argue that there could be a bubble there that disrupts the use of energy-based weapons, things like QED and whatnot that require a lot of energy. As such, you could make the counter argument that you could use ballistics with impunity, and I think that would be valuable. It would do a couple of things. One, if you were operating as a pirate, now this is total theory crafting, so feel free to edit this if it's not germane. But one, the ballistics would have a logistic train, so you wouldn't be able to operate indefinitely based off of your ship's reactor. And two, it would start to classify, someone's using ballistics. They're probably a ne'er-do-well, and they're going to come after me. So that would also communicate a couple of things. So there's value in doing that. I would also argue there's value in an armistice zone. I want to be a proponent for armistice zones because I think certain areas should have them. I think they should be there because there should be low profit trading that is protected to build the logistic backbone of the game. I also think that there should be areas that are not protected, and those should be the high profit routes. Where there is great risk, there is great reward.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So, I look back at other games and I mean, they're set up that way, right? You have other MMOs where, even on PvP orientated servers, you start off in these green style zones where no one's really going to get you. No one can get you. But as you progress through the game and open up your ability to, go after bigger monsters, pursue bigger treasures, it gets more and more dangerous from a player perspective. And I think it makes sense from games, especially as Star Citizen with such a steep learning curve, that, people can kind of get weighted into it that way.
Really do wish that the spawn point stations were better protected or even had something as simple as like a bumpable like bubble shield around the pad so somebody couldn't pad ram you. I know CIG said multiple times that they don't want to do that, but like even if it was just a temporary, I think it would be an easy temporary fix that they could just implement for alpha for the sake of just cutting down what actual griefers do, which is fuck with people at spawn points and stations and weird shit like that. Like if you're preventing people from actually getting out into the universe to like play the game, well, it's pretty easy to figure out who's actually causing problems for the community as a whole. It feels like there'd be some really simple steps to make the stations actually more secure and less griefable.
So my personal thoughts on the armistice zone, and this is like to tie this all back into like how far is too far when it comes to PvP and piracy. This starts going into the discussion of like what is considered acceptable actions for pirates to perform within an armistice zone that's supposed to be safe. Because a lot of people would turn around and say, oh, you know, like, you guys are griefing because you just hit somebody in an armistice zone. That's supposed to be safe. You're not supposed to do anything there. And, like, I turn around and say, you know, that's a load of shit. Like, this armistice zone is currently an artificial measure to prevent us from being able to do harm to you. But it's not there to prevent us from interacting with you. And running onto somebody's ship when they open up the door, even though we're not invited, you know, like, we're not technically doing harm to them. We haven't shot at them or anything like that. We may not have good intentions, but the game mechanics allow us to do that. Pad ramming is technically permitted within the game mechanics. It's just the rule sets that are external to the game mechanics say that you're not supposed to do it. But there's nothing there to stop you from pad ramming in the game's mechanics. And that's a problem that CIG needs to address. But when we're talking about, like, doing piracy in an armistice zone, my mindset is that armistice zones will never go away. They will just evolve. And we're already seeing it with the stations. There's still an armistice zone around all the ports, all the rest stops. It's just you can shoot at the ships from your own ship within that area. When you do so, though, you get a crime stat, and then all the station security start shooting at you. And this is where the layered defense thing comes into play, and which is why spawn closets are actually quite important, because in order for CIG to allow us to carry weapons in first-person mode inside stations and other armistice zone areas, they need the spawn closets there so that the FPS security actually has somewhere to come from. So
Makes sense.
the armistice zones will never go away. It's just the response from security that will dictate what level of security is actually being provided. You know, it's the difference between Idris's and Hammerhead showing up versus, you know, like a couple of Avenger stalkers. Now, with that in mind, like, you know, what limits are there to doing piracy? Like, how far is going too far when it's, you know, piracy? I'll just finish off my little point, and then I'll hand over to you, Bitters. My thought process on this is using exploits. So there are certain exploits that can be utilized in order to gain an unfair advantage. These exploits are more or less, from my, like, that I know of, normally things that you can use to get inside of locked ships. If the ship is buttoned up, there are ways of being able to, like, glitch into that ship without having to breach doors or anything like that. That's going too far, because in my mind, it's not less about the whole, you know, using an exploit to get into the ship, to, you know, like, taking advantage of that exploit. It's more about us not doing our due diligence in maintaining our piracy skills and taking the easy way out to get the job done. It's one of those situations where it's like, all right, we can't get into this ship because it's locked up and we're inside an armistice zone, and somebody goes, it's for example, a Cutlass Black, oh, we can just jump in through the side door and just glitch in. It's like, every time I tell the guys, no, don't do that. The ship is locked. We technically, like, we should not be able to get in there. That glitch there, shouldn't be using that. We'll work out a different way. The doors are still damageable. Like, we'll just, you know, nudge it with the ship. See if we can damage it enough that it pops open. Or, you know, block the terminal so that the player can't interact with it, so that they run out to the ship, open up the ramp, and then we jump in. And that's one of the things that I think, you know, like, people have to draw their own limits. Some people won't have any. They won't care, and others do. But yeah, Bitters, what were you going to say, mate?
Actually, I was going to go down that same rabbit hole that you introduced there with, if there are, say, glitches like, say, the Cutlass entrance, which is, I think, pretty objectively considered, I think, something that shouldn't be in the game, getting in through a locked door. But then there's, creative use of current game mechanics that, could aid piracy, whether it's, ship markers because of a ship you've been on before, or using mission or contract based items to create, again, markers and location, kind of god eye icons. So what do you guys kind of see as going too far with, say, existing in-game mechanics to further your piracy?
Well, I guess it depends on if that mechanic is intended or not, right? It's kind of this strange blend of bugs, game mechanics that aren't fully fleshed out or developed, and legitimate exploits that just shouldn't even be there. So it's kind of a funny mix of figuring out which ones are which, right? Like Agent said, getting into ships that are locked by just finding the sweet spot where you can phase through reality or whatever is pretty silly. The call bug, right? That's a pretty scummy way of trying to figure out people where people are. It's almost weird. It almost feels like that mechanic is supposed to be intended, and then you realize how it works, and you're like, oh, okay, that's definitely a fucking exploit, right? Because if they actually picked up the phone call and then, say, it gave you a marker on where they were because you connected with them via the communication relay information network or whatever, right? Like, it kind of makes sense in a way that maybe you can trace the signal, or maybe it shows you where they are. But no, it's just some bullshit where if they're in a party and you call them and they don't even pick up, it just shows you where they are. That's definitely a scummy one to make use of for honestly anything. We get bounty hunters that fucking do that crap all the time when they already have a god marker to track us with.
So I would love to jump on this from the opposite perspective. You're listing off all the things I love to do, and I say that because I see this as an alpha, and to do our due diligence, we have to highlight these things. So what's often fun is using these capabilities, and then when you're done with the target, you share the error report so that person can lend their frustration onto it to highlight it further to SIG so that we have a more holistic game. One of the things I like to refer to is what I call the golden age of piracy, 3.4 to 3.8, back when you could use Reclaimer to merge a caterpillar to the physics grid, and every caterpillar you captured was worth 400,000 to 1.7 million, depending on what was on board. At that time frame, there was zero extortion because there was no reason whatsoever to engage in discussions with anyone. Just take their stuff and move on. So I was really upset the first time they got rid of it because there went piracy as I knew it, and it was very sad for me. But as a result, I have seen a much more enjoyable, much more robust engagement of piracy, and I think it's been a good thing for the game. So my perspective is more along the lines of, yeah, I totally understand that it's not something that we should do because it takes away from our skills, but we need to hit people and give them the link so that they add their voice to the frustration so that SIG corrects these glitches. That's my thought.
Definitely. No, I agree with that because I think this is something that we talked about in the last Mongrel Court as well, was that using these exploits, if you're going to use the exploits or glitches or stupid game mechanics to take advantage of, don't hide it. Don't, hoard the secret like it's some trade, masterpiece that makes everything function. You definitely spreading awareness to this stuff so it actually gets fixed. Because, we want a functioning game. We want it to be more like in depth and complicated and intricate. to get the Star Citizen experience that we all signed up for. We just, as like you said, it's alpha. It's in active development. We're in the middle of a great science experiment, basically, and there's going to be some ridiculous bugs that pop up. I recently found a way to phase through the bottom of a Vanguard Sentinel in the weirdest possible way that you could probably fucking imagine. And you know what I mean? I put it in a video and posted it. It's like, just, I don't know if it's fixable or, but we can make a report for it. It's just, there's you know what I mean? Like, add it to the list. There's a million of them, and they keep growing and disappearing from one patch to the other. So it's interesting to keep track of and try and nail all these little bugs that crawl out of the woodwork.
Yeah, myself personally, when it comes to utilizing like or repurposing certain game mechanics, so like my favorite one is the delivery boxes and the crypto keys that can, you know, have the mission marker on them. I do not see that as an exploit, and the reason for this is that it's utilizing a game mechanic to provide additional gameplay, but the way that you have to utilize it, like, you still got to try and get that item onto the target ship, and then you got to try and place it somewhere so that they don't notice it, and so that whilst they're flying around, it doesn't, like, if it's on the outside of the ship, it doesn't fall off. If it's on the inside of the ship, so that they don't notice it. And doing so in a way, like, it requires actually a lot of effort to actually do it right. So I see that, like, that enhances our gameplay in a way that you wouldn't actually consider as something that would be an exploit, because tracking of ships is supposed to be a thing. The thing that I would like to see is, like, you know, CIG actually taking that and actually turning it into a proper object, and they're being putting parameters and limitations on it so it doesn't, like, broadcast from one end of the system to the other, so that, you know, like, its accuracy diminishes over distance, and, you know, it's limited in how long it actually sticks around for. Unfortunately, though, we're at the mercy of what CIG has, you know, is building. So we just use the tools that we have to achieve what we can. But, you know, like, the idea of using glitches to get inside of ships, I'm not a big fan of doing that, because we already have the capability of being able to get into ships, and that's by, you know, like, damaging doors and things like that. So it's one of those situations where it's like, well, I shouldn't need to use a glitch to be able to do that, because I can, you know, wait until that ship comes outside the armistice zone, disable, crack the doors open, and I'm in. It's just one of those things where it's like, understand, like, you know, drawing your own personal line. Some people just don't care, and they're willing to do that. I know of people who have been given temporary bans, though, for using excessive glitches to get inside of ships. And I'm like, you know, it happens. And you know, you kind of got to understand, like, you got to sit there and ask yourself the question, like, does this give me an unfair advantage against my opponent? When we do piracy, though, we set ourselves up in that sort of fashion because we want to win. So we set ourselves up to do piracy, which is a very one-sided situation. So, you know, like, having your own sort of, like, line drawn in the sand really helps with, you know, like, how far you go. And for the purposes of, like, you know, testing and, you know, bug reporting, I will replicate glitches, like phasing into somebody's ship and doing all that sort of stuff. Normally, though, I'll do it on my own. I'll do it on my own stuff. I won't do it to someone else, but I will share that IC report with other people, and I'll tell them, you know, provide video evidence and show them, this is how you do it. Go and replicate it now. Upvote this, you know, let's try and get this fixed. A lot of those glitches that have been reported, the reason why they haven't been fixed yet is because it's a server side issue, and, you know, it's going to get resolved another way, or the ships, you know, are still being worked on, and they're not going to get, you know, resolved in a while. At that point, CIG kind of, like, when they acknowledge that one of those glitches exists, they expect the player base to not use those exploits. Continue reporting them, but don't use them in your generic gameplay. Because if they catch you doing that and you keep doing it after they tell you to stop, you're going to get a forced vacation. Did you guys have anything more to talk about in regards to how far is too far when it comes to PvP and piracy?
I got my thoughts out.
Yeah, I'm good.
I think I got most of them out.
No worries. Alright, well, I'm pretty keen on ending this session of the Mongrel Court. We've been going at this for a while, so it's going to be a bit of a doozy to cut down, but I think there was some good discussion points. And I think we went down a couple of rabbit holes, but it still followed some good discussion points that approached these topics at angles that some people probably are considering. But without further ado, on my far right, your left, we've got DT. Next to him, we got Bitters, and then next to him, we've got CoconutJones, and I'm still the same guy. We're going to close off the topic.
We hope that this has provided some insight into the thoughts of some active pirate players about piracy and PvP within Star Citizen. The Mongrel Court is looking for guest speakers from active pirate orgs. If you're interested in joining in on a Mongrel Court session, the criteria for consideration is as follows. Your main org must be a pirate org. You must provide video evidence of you conducting piracy operations within the last 4 weeks. Staged or simulated submissions will not be considered. The videos do not need to be edited or on a public video streaming service like YouTube or Vimeo. Next month's topic of discussion is prison, gameplay or punishment. If you have any questions or discussion points you would like discussed on the topic of prison, being gameplay or punishment, feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you like what you saw, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends, and set the notification bell to on so you get to see our new content drops that we put out on a weekly basis. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you next time when Court is in session.